The omega block that dominated the final 2 weeks of May is finally fracturing, and the plains, the southeast, and the Missouri Valley are all waking up to a completely different atmosphere this week, one loaded with moisture, instability, and the kind of back-to-back severe weather days that define early June at its worst. Welcome to Sky Space Lab, I am Arthur. This channel is very new, and every like and subscription truly helps us grow and bring you even deeper, more powerful research. Thank you in advance for every like and follow. Let's start with the big picture, because what is happening right now in the jet stream is the reason this entire week is going to be so active. And to understand that, you have to understand what we have been living inside for the past 2 to 3 weeks. An omega block is a large-scale weather pattern in which a massive ridge of high pressure builds across the central part of the country, while 2 separate low-pressure systems sit on either side of it, one to the west and one to the east. When you draw the upper-level flow on a map, that ridge traces out a shape that looks like the Greek letter omega, which is where the name comes from. Omega blocks are powerful pattern-locking mechanisms. They resist change. They push the jet stream, which is the river of fast-moving upper-level winds that steers all of our weather systems, far to the north and south around the edges of the pattern, instead of allowing storms to sweep cleanly across the country. The result is that the central plains go quiet. Moisture gets bottled up. Instability builds and builds with nowhere to go, and the plains sit there, loaded and waiting, while the calendar clicks toward June. That is exactly what has been happening. For roughly the past 2 weeks, that omega block held firm. The Storm Prediction Center barely had anything to outline across Tornado Alley. If you follow severe weather at all, you know how unusual that is for late May. The central and southern plains are supposed to be producing significant tornado events during this time of year. Supercells, outbreaks, the whole machinery of peak season. Instead, the block locked it all down. Oklahoma reportedly made it through the entire month of May with no confirmed tornado reports, something that has not happened since 2005. That is 21 years without this happening. That is how rare and how complete this suppression was. But the omega block is breaking down now, and when these patterns fracture, they do not go quietly. The low-pressure system that has been anchored off the west coast is finally beginning to feel the pull of the broader flow. A mid-level trough is lifting northward through the central and northern plains today, Sunday, May 31st. This trough is relatively weak by late spring standards, and it is negatively tilted, meaning the axis is oriented in a way that allows it to gather spin more efficiently than a positively tilted or neutral system would. As it lifts northward through the day, it is pulling the jet with it, which is allowing rich Gulf moisture to stream northward into regions that have not seen proper low-level fuel in weeks. Surface dew points are climbing back into the upper 60s to low 70s Fahrenheit across the Missouri Valley and parts of Kansas and Oklahoma. That is warm, juicy, severely unstable air, and it is about to meet a rapidly evolving set of forcing mechanisms over the next 24 to 48 hours. The thing that makes this week genuinely complicated to forecast is that this is not a clean, large-scale outbreak setup. What the Storm Prediction Center is dealing with right now is a series of mesoscale events, meaning small-scale, often localized convective episodes that are driven by subtle features, outflow boundaries left over from overnight storms, subtle short waves rotating through the base of a broader trough, and dryline positions that shift by 30 miles and completely change the tornado potential. Mesoscale means small scale in meteorological terms, and it is the forecasting equivalent of trying to predict exactly which city gets hit by a pop-up storm on a hot August afternoon. The general threat area is clear. The exact where and when is not. That is the honest answer, and that is what makes this week require your full attention if you live anywhere from the Central Plains to the Tennessee Valley. Here is where we stand for today, Sunday, May 31st. The Storm Prediction Center has issued a marginal risk of severe thunderstorms, which is a level 1 out of 5, across a large swathe of the central United States. That marginal zone stretches from the Dakotas in the north southward through Nebraska and into the Ozarks region, plus a separate area covering southwest Texas. A marginal risk means isolated severe thunderstorms are possible, limited in duration or coverage or intensity, but not impossible, and certainly not something to ignore if you are in the target area. Let's break down each zone separately, because the atmosphere is doing different things in different places, and the hazard profile is completely different between them. Starting with Nebraska into the Dakotas. The negatively tilted upper trough that is currently lifting northward is providing the greatest forcing for ascent in this region today. Forcing for ascent is the atmospheric mechanism that helps air lift off the surface and build into thunderstorms. Without it, even a rich and unstable air mass can sit there doing nothing. With it, storms fire. In Nebraska and the Dakotas today, that forcing is present. The Storm Prediction Center's 6 a.m. outlook noted that shear, which is the change in wind speed and direction with height that gives thunderstorms their rotation, will not be overly strong in this area. Deep layer shear is running at lower end values for organized supercell activity. What that means practically is that discrete rotating supercells capable of strong tornadoes are unlikely in this zone today. What is likely is widely scattered to scattered thunderstorms capable of locally damaging winds and perhaps some hail. If you are in Sioux Falls, Rapid City, Pierre or Bismarck, a severe thunderstorm is possible during the afternoon heating hours. The primary hazard is damaging wind gusts and hail up to about an inch in diameter. Keep that in mind for any outdoor activities today, especially in the afternoon between about 1 and 6 in the evening. Now, the Kansas and Missouri situation today is actually the most interesting piece of the puzzle, and the one that has the best chance of upgrading to a slight risk in a future outlook this afternoon. Here is why. The overnight and morning hours have already likely produced convective activity across parts of the mid-Missouri Valley, and that activity is going to leave behind what meteorologists call an outflow boundary. An outflow boundary is essentially a shallow density discontinuity left on the surface after a cluster of storms moves through. Think of it as a scar on the atmosphere. Cool, dense outflow air from the rain and downdrafts spreads out and creates a thin line of convergence along its leading edge. That line is incredibly important because when a new storm forms near or along that boundary, it can tap into locally enhanced storm relative helicity, which is the measure of the rotation potential in the low levels of the atmosphere. The SPC explicitly flagged this today. They noted that deep layer shear would be sufficient for supercell structures along that outflow boundary in Kansas and Missouri, capable of large hail, severe winds, and perhaps a tornado. The word perhaps is doing a lot of work in that sentence. This scenario is conditional. Storm development along the surface trough and dry line in this region is uncertain because mid-level heights are modestly rising through the day, which tends to work against storm initiation. But if a storm or two can fire along that boundary, the environment is not terrible. Dew points in the upper 60s to low 70s. Fahrenheit will support extremely strong convective available potential energy, or CAPE, which is the measure of the fuel available for thunderstorm updrafts. The SPC noted values of 3,500 to 5,000 joules per kilogram in this region. That is not just strong, that is borderline extreme. If a storm can tap that fuel and get organized along the outflow boundary, where the surge is locally enhanced, the severe weather threat becomes real and fast. The SPC also mentioned a subtle shortwave, a small ripple in the upper level flow that could initiate convection in the vicinity of northeast Kansas and northwest Missouri during the afternoon hours. This is a scenario worth watching. If it materializes and storms can sustain themselves overnight, when nocturnal cooling is gradual because of that moist air mass, a mesoscale convective system, or MCS, could develop and track southeast along the outflow boundary. The primary threat from that scenario would be damaging winds. The Storm Prediction Center said that if confidence increases in either the daytime supercell scenario or the overnight MCS scenario, a categorical slight risk upgrade would be warranted. Watch for that in the afternoon outlooks, now southwest Texas. This is a different kind of setup from the plains. Strong heating west of the dry line will promote at least isolated storm development during the afternoon hours, with the Storm Prediction Center noting higher confidence in storm coverage across southwest Texas, particularly near the Davis Mountains where moist upslope flow off the Gulf is funneling into the terrain. CAPE in this region is running moderate to strong 2,000 to 4,000 joules per kilogram, but deep layer shear is weak. What that combination gives you is storms with strong updrafts that struggle to organize into well-structured rotating supercells. The main hazard from any southwest Texas storms today will be severe wind gusts. Large hail is possible if a storm manages to tap the strongest buoyancy. The tornado threat here today is very low, close to negligible, given the weak shear environment. If you are in the Del Rio, Odessa or Midland area, stay weather aware this afternoon, primarily for gusty winds and small to moderate hail. Now let us move to Monday, June 1st, because this is where the atmosphere takes a significant step forward in terms of threat. The Storm Prediction Center has already issued a slight risk of severe thunderstorms, level 2 out of 5, for parts of the Central Plains on Monday. This is a meaningful upgrade from today's marginal, and the reasons for it are specific and well-grounded in the data. Here is what changes overnight into Monday. A surface low will deepen in far southwest Kansas, with upslope easterly flow developing across much of the Central Plains. Upslope flow happens when surface winds blow from lower elevations toward higher terrain, which forces the air to rise mechanically. In the Central High Plains, this process is remarkably effective at destabilizing the lower atmosphere and providing the lift that gets storms started. An axis of low-level moisture and instability is forecast to set up from central Kansas west-northwestward into northeastern Colorado during the day, with surface dew points running mostly in the 50s Fahrenheit along the instability axis. That is not as rich as what Kansas and Missouri will have today, but the combination with steeper mid-level lapse rates makes up for it. Lapse rate refers to how quickly temperature drops with altitude. The steeper the lapse rate, the more unstable the atmosphere, and the stronger the updrafts when storms do fire. The SPC's forecast soundings near the instability axis at the Monday evening timeframe show mixed layer CAPE values of 1,500 to 2,000 joules per kilogram with 0 to 6 km shear near 40 knots. 40 knots of deep layer shear is solidly in the range for supercell development. The SPC specifically noted that this environment will support supercells with large hail and severe wind gusts. The potential for severe wind gusts is expected to increase during the Monday evening hours as a cluster of cells moves east-northeastward across the Central High Plains. If you live in Dodge City, Hays, or Salina in Kansas, or if you are anywhere along the Interstate 70 corridor from Colby to Salina Monday evening, this is a setup worth paying close attention to. Hail up to golf ball size or larger is possible from any organized supercell that manages to stay discrete. Wind gusts approaching 60 miles per hour will be possible as storm clusters develop. Further east across eastern Kansas, eastern Nebraska, and eastern South Dakota, the Monday setup gets more complicated and actually more interesting from a severe weather standpoint. This area will be sitting beneath the building mid-level ridge, which as I mentioned tends to suppress storm coverage. But the surface dew points in this area on Monday will be significantly richer than the instability axis to the west. The SPC noted dew points from the mid-60s northward to the low 70s Fahrenheit, which produces an axis of moderate to strong instability by afternoon. The catch is forcing. Weak forcing beneath a mid-level ridge means that storms will struggle to initiate. But if they do initiate and persist, the SPC said the severe threat would be expected, with severe wind gusts and hail as the primary threats. This is a conditional scenario, the kind that can produce a completely quiet afternoon or a sudden intense severe storm with very little warning. That is exactly the definition of mesoscale unpredictability that has defined this weather pattern for weeks. The second part of Monday's setup is the one that extends from the lower Missouri Valley and northern Ozarks southeastward into the mid-Mississippi Valley in the southeast. The SPC flagged a large-scale mid-level cyclonic flow pattern across the eastern United States on Monday, meaning the upper-level winds are flowing in a curved cyclonic pattern that favors storm development and organization. At the surface, a moist air mass loaded with upper 60s to lower 70s dew points extends from the lower Missouri Valley down through the mid-Mississippi Valley and into the southeast. That is the same warm tropical air mass that has been fueling thunderstorms across Dixie Alley for weeks. The specific scenario that makes this area potentially volatile on Monday involves a shortwave trough, another one of those small ripples in the upper-level flow that some model guidance is moving southward across the mid-Mississippi Valley. If that shortwave verifies on the aggressive solutions, the wind damage and hail threat could be greatest from parts of western Tennessee, southward into the central Gulf Coast states, including areas near Memphis, Tupelo, and across central Mississippi and Alabama. An isolated wind damage and hail threat could also extend eastward into northern Georgia and South Carolina. The honors qualifier here is that the SPC used the word uncertainty to describe the spatial coverage in this area on Monday. Other model solutions keep storm coverage more isolated. This points to the same theme we have been dealing with all week. The threat is real. The exact location of the greatest intensity is not locked in yet. If you live from the Missouri Boothiel through Memphis and southward into central Mississippi, Monday afternoon and evening is a period to stay weather aware. The atmosphere does not care that it is the first week of June. It does not ease into the new month gently or give anyone a grace period after the quiet that defined the final stretch of May. What the data is showing right now for Wednesday and Thursday is a pattern that meteorologists watch carefully, not because it is a single dramatic high-end outbreak, but because it is the kind of setup that catches people off guard precisely because it does not look like a classic plains tornado day. It looks like a garden variety storm day, until it is not. Let us talk about Tuesday, June 2nd first, because this is the transition day between the Monday Central Plains setup and what comes roaring in from the west midweek. The Storm Prediction Center's Day 4 through 8 outlook, issued early this morning, addressed Tuesday explicitly. Mid-level heights will be rising across the central United States as southwesterly mid-level flow settles in over the Rockies and High Plains. That height rise is a suppressing influence, generally working against widespread organized severe weather. But here is the thing about suppression in a moisture-rich environment. It does not eliminate the threat. It concentrates it. When the cap, which is the stable layer in the mid-levels of the atmosphere that acts like a lid on a pressure cooker, is strong enough to hold back most convective development, the storms that do manage to punch through that cap are often the strongest, most intense, most long-lived cells of the day. They have beaten the atmosphere's own resistance to form, and they carry that energy with them. For Tuesday, the primary areas the SPC is watching include the southern high plains and into West Texas, where a Gulf-sourced moisture plume is being funneled northward and westward into the region. The Weather Prediction Center upgraded excessive rainfall risks for both Tuesday and Wednesday for eastern New Mexico into West Texas, specifically noting that confidence increased in the Gulf moisture interaction with terrain-enhanced convective triggers. When you combine that moisture surge with the heating available over the high terrain of eastern New Mexico and the rolling plains of West Texas, isolated severe storms become likely during the afternoon hours. The main hazards in that corridor on Tuesday will be large hail and damaging wind gusts. With weak deep layer shear present, the tornado threat stays low, but not zero. Any storm that manages to remain discrete before the inevitable upscaling into line segments or clusters will carry a brief tornado risk. Cities like Lubbock, Midland, and Odessa should be monitoring this closely through Tuesday afternoon. Meanwhile, across the lower Missouri Valley and into the southeast on Tuesday, the leftover moisture and instability from the Monday system will keep scattered thunderstorm activity ongoing. This is the kind of day where thunderstorms fire up in the afternoon, produce some gusty winds and hail, and slowly weaken after sunset. The severe threat here on Tuesday is lower than Monday, but isolated damaging wind gusts and penny to quarter-sized hail are possible from Little Rock and Memphis southward through Jackson, Mississippi, and into the central Gulf Coast states. Now let us get into the meat of this week. Wednesday, June 3rd and Thursday, June 4th. This is the period the SPC Day 4 through 8. Product flagged specifically with the clearest language of growing confidence. Here is what is coming. A mid-level trough is forecast to move into the northern high plains on Wednesday, and then translate into the upper Mississippi Valley on Thursday, before pushing into the Great Lakes region by Friday. This is a meaningful system. It is not a massive deep trough of the kind that produces a high-risk multi-state outbreak, but it is organized, it is moving with purpose, and it is arriving into an atmosphere that has been loading moisture and instability for weeks. The language the SPC used is important. They said a moist and unstable air mass is forecast over the northern plains, where a severe threat will be possible during the afternoon and evening on both Wednesday and Thursday. Large hail and severe wind gusts would be possible. The threat is forecast to be concentrated ahead of a cold front passing through the northern plains. That cold front is the trigger here. As the mid-level trough drives southeastward and the cold front sweeps through, the sharp moisture gradient and wind shear concentrated along and ahead of that front will provide the forcing for storm development. This is a more classical setup than the mesoscale scenarios we have been dealing with for the past week, and classical setups are more predictable. For Wednesday, the primary threat zone is expected to be across the northern high plains, stretching from parts of eastern Wyoming through western South Dakota and into western Nebraska. Dew points in the mid to upper 50s will be present ahead of the front, which is not spectacular moisture for late spring, but the lapse rates in the mid-levels should be steep enough to compensate. Convective available potential energy will be building through the day as surface temperatures warm rapidly under strong late spring insolation. The SPC noted considerable uncertainty concerning the exact timing of the cold front passage, which is the key variable here. A fast front undercuts the storms before they can organize. A slow front allows the storms to mature and stay discrete longer, which elevates the tornado threat. As we get into Tuesday evening and Wednesday morning model runs, that front timing will sharpen considerably, and the threat area may need adjustment. For Thursday, June 4th, the threat shifts east as the trough translates into the upper Mississippi Valley. The SPC flagged this same system as capable of producing large hail and severe wind gusts, concentrated ahead of the cold front across the northern plains. As the front pivots east and southeast, cities like Rapid City, Pierre, Aberdeen in South Dakota, and across into western Minnesota near Sioux Falls could find themselves in the threat zone during the Thursday afternoon and evening window. The SPC also noted that in the wake of the mid-level trough, a shortwave ridge will build into the northern plains by Friday, which will keep any severe weather on Friday more isolated and localized across the Dakotas. So Wednesday and Thursday are the peak days for this particular wave, not Friday. Now let us do what you came here for. Let us walk through the hour-by-hour radar evolution for Monday, June 1st, which is the single most well-defined severe weather day in the immediate forecast period with the slight risk already in place from the Storm Prediction Center. Monday morning starts relatively quietly across the central plains. The surface low that will be deepening in far southwest Kansas overnight into Monday morning will still be in its early stages by dawn. Dew points across central and eastern Kansas will already be climbing into the mid to upper 60s by sunrise, which tells you how loaded the air mass is. The morning convective activity from overnight storms, if it materializes as the SPC suggested it might across the Missouri Valley, will likely be weakening and moving off to the east by 8 or 9 in the morning. What that overnight activity leaves behind is that critically important outflow boundary stretched across Missouri, potentially extending back into eastern Kansas. Through the mid-morning hours, the atmosphere reloads. Surface heating cranks up under partly cloudy to partly sunny skies across western and central Kansas into northeastern Colorado. The cap, that mid-level stable layer, is present but not overwhelming in the instability axis. By around noon to 1 in the afternoon, storms will begin firing along the higher terrain of east-central Colorado, where upslope flow is mechanically forcing air parcels above the lifting condensation level. These initial Colorado afternoon storms will look isolated and discrete on radar. Each cell will have a clear anvil, a crisp hook echo structure, and a well-defined mesocyclone signature if the shear is cooperating. These are your best hail producers of the day. Golf ball to baseball-sized hail is possible from the strongest cells in eastern Colorado between roughly 1 and 3 in the afternoon. If you have a vehicle parked outside in Pueblo, Colorado Springs East, or along the corridor from La Junta toward Lamar, get it under cover by early afternoon Monday. Between 2 and 4 in the afternoon, additional storms develop across the central high plains of western Kansas, along and near the instability axis. The SPC described this zone as running from central Kansas west-northwestward into northeastern Colorado. These storms will be competing for the same moisture, and the question of whether they stay discrete or quickly cluster into a messy convective line will determine everything about the tornado and hail threat. Discrete supercells, each with their own mesocyclone and inflow, produce the most significant hail and carry the highest tornado potential. Once storms start merging, the dynamics shift toward outflow dominance, where the cold pools from each storm undercut the rotation and the primary threat becomes straight-line wind damage. For the Monday afternoon window, the SPC's assessment is that this environment will support supercells. That word support is meaningful. It does not mean every storm becomes a supercell. It means the shear and instability combination does not prevent supercell development. With 40 knots of 0 to 6 km shear in place, and MLCAPE between 1500 and 2000 joules per kilogram, a storm that stays discrete for even 2 to 3 hours in this environment can produce significant large hail and a brief tornado if the low-level shear is locally enhanced. Between 4 and 6 in the afternoon, storm coverage will be expanding across the central high plains. Cells will be moving generally east to east-northeast. Any cell that develops along or near the outflow boundary from the morning convection in Missouri and Kansas carries an elevated supercell and tornado potential because that boundary locally enhances low-level rotation. Around 5 to 7 in the evening is the peak window for the most significant severe weather in the Central Plains on Monday. If you are in Hays, Great Bend, Hutchinson, or Salina in Kansas, this is the critical time period. damaging wind gusts of 50 to 60 miles per hour will be possible. Large hail, with isolated instances of baseball size or larger from any supercell that remains discrete, is possible through this window. The tornado threat, while not the headline hazard today, is not zero in this environment, especially if discrete storms form near or along any surface boundaries. Do not let the modest risk level from the SPC lull you into complacency. A marginal or slight risk environment can still produce a significant tornado if the right storm gets the right ingredients in the right place. Into the evening hours, Monday's storm activity will tend to cluster and upscale into a mesoscale convective system, a large, organized complex of thunderstorms that sweeps eastward across Kansas and into Missouri and Iowa. When this transition happens, the hail threat diminishes significantly because the overshooting tops of individual supercells are replaced by a larger stratiform rain and wind damage complex. The primary hazard shifts entirely to damaging straight-line winds. Bow echoes, which are the bow-shaped radar signatures associated with the most damaging wind events within a mesoscale convective system, can produce wind gusts of 60 to 80 miles per hour, strong enough to snap large trees, damage roofs, and knock out power for hundreds of thousands of people. The Monday overnight wind threat from this system should be tracked carefully. Areas from Wichita through Topeka and Kansas City could see wind gusts approaching or exceeding severe limits during the late evening and overnight hours as the system organizes and accelerates. Over in the southeast and mid-Mississippi Valley, Monday afternoon and evening activity will be more scattered and harder to pin down precisely. Storms will develop during peak heating hours, roughly 2 to 6 in the afternoon, from parts of western Tennessee southward through Mississippi and into Alabama. These storms will be fueled by those upper 60s to low 70s dew points that have been baking under partial sun. The instability will be strong, 3,000 joules per kilogram of CAPE or more in some spots, but the shear in this region on Monday is lower than in the Central Plains, which makes organized supercells less likely. Multicell clusters and ordinary cells will dominate the southeast storm coverage Monday afternoon. The primary hazards across this corridor on Monday will be localized flooding from slow-moving storm cells, damaging wind gusts from any strong cell with a robust cold pool, and small to moderate hail. If you are in Memphis, Tupelo, Jackson, or Birmingham, stay weather aware Monday afternoon and evening, and be alert for flash flood warnings, especially in areas where multiple rounds of storms are expected to track over the same ground. Now let us talk about rainfall totals and the flooding picture, because this is genuinely the hazard that deserves the most attention over the full 7-day period. The excessive rainfall threat is not confined to one day or one region. It is spread across the week. It involves multiple areas that already have saturated soils from weeks of persistent Gulf moisture advection, and in some locations the accumulated totals are going to be impressive and concerning. For the southeast and central Gulf Coast, the Weather Prediction Center has been flagging a persistent pattern of heavy rainfall with multiple slight risk areas for excessive rainfall already issued. The combination of a slow-moving boundary stalled across the deep south, continuous Gulf moisture streaming northward, and slow storm motion means that some locations from the Louisiana and Mississippi Gulf Coast northward through Alabama and into the Tennessee Valley are going to see repetitive heavy rainfall events through at least midweek. Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Hattiesburg, and Mobile are particularly vulnerable. These areas sit on nearly saturated soils from weeks of above normal rainfall. When you drop another 2 to 5 inches of rain on saturated soil in a period of 2 or 3 days, the water has nowhere to go. Flash flooding accelerates much faster than it would on dry ground. Streams and bayous that are already running high will respond rapidly to additional heavy rainfall. The Weather Prediction Center specifically mentioned that the plume of tropical moisture surging from the central Gulf may interact with remnant fronts and troughs along the central Gulf Coast later in the week, which could cause heavy rainfall across areas from New Orleans eastward into the Florida Panhandle. Pensacola and Panama City need to monitor this closely. Additionally, a cold front is forecast to push into Florida by Wednesday or Thursday, interacting with tropical humidity over the Florida Peninsula and likely producing significant rainfall totals for central and south Florida. WPC guidance noted heavy rain is likely in places across Florida during that cold frontal passage mid to late week. Out west, the upgrade to slight risk excessive rainfall areas for eastern New Mexico and West Texas for Tuesday and Wednesday deserves specific attention. The Weather Prediction Center increased confidence in this area after noting a Gulf-sourced moisture plume funneling into the southern Rockies and drifting east over the southern high plains. Terrain-enhanced convection in this region can produce rainfall rates that overwhelm the drainage systems quickly, particularly over the arroyos and dry washes of eastern New Mexico and the rolling plains. Flash flood watches for this area would not be surprising by Tuesday afternoon. If you are in Roswell, Carlsbad, or the Midland-Odessa corridor, monitor local National Weather Service forecasts closely through Tuesday and Wednesday. Across the northern plains and into Montana, the Weather Prediction Center noted that the front associated with the mid-level trough arriving Wednesday and Thursday could bring several additional inches of rainfall to parts of Montana, raising concerns for isolated river flooding on top of the flash flooding threat. Montana has seen a wet spring, and additional significant rainfall on top of already elevated stream levels in the Yellowstone and Missouri River drainages should prompt attention from river forecast centers. Now let us talk about the extended picture, 7 to 14 days out. What do the models say about where this pattern goes, and what does that mean for severe weather season heading deeper into June? Both the Global Forecast System, which is the primary American model, and the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecast model, which is the European model widely considered the gold standard for medium-range prediction, are telling a fairly similar story through the first week of June. The mid-level trough that drives the Wednesday through Thursday severe weather event tracks off to the east by the weekend of June 6th and 7th. Behind it, the Climate Prediction Center's probabilistic hazards outlook indicates that a mid-level ridge is anticipated to shift eastward from the western United States toward the Central Plains early in the second week of June, with both the GFS and European model ensembles showing positive 500 millibar height normalized anomalies, exceeding 3 standard deviations above normal across the northern plains and upper Mississippi Valley in the June 6th through 12th period. What that means in practical terms is that a significant heat ridge is likely to build across the north-central United States heading into the second full week of June. That heat ridge is the wild card. On one hand, it will suppress severe weather directly beneath it. On the other hand, it creates a sharp contrast along its southern and eastern flanks, where heat and Gulf moisture collide with whatever front or trough arrives from the west. The WPC extended forecast discussion mentioned a deep low approaching the Pacific Northwest by around the Friday of next week, which would be June 6th or 7th. If that system is deep enough and the timing is right, an ejection over the Rockies into the plains during the second weekend of June becomes a legitimate possibility. The European model has been hinting at exactly this scenario, and when the European model consistently shows the same thing across multiple runs, it tends to be worth paying attention to. The GFS has been slightly slower with this potential system, which is not unusual. The WPC forecasters noted they favour the European solution in the extended period and suggested a blend leaning toward the European is the preferred approach. The bottom line on the extended outlook is this. The first week of June is going to be active in a mesoscale day-to-day sense. Storms every afternoon, some days quiet, some days surprisingly significant. The Wednesday and Thursday Northern Plains threat is the most well-defined multi-day event in that window. And then heading into the second weekend of June, the setup for a larger-scale organised severe weather event is growing in the models. That is the period to watch. That is when the pattern may finally produce the kind of outbreak that the loaded atmosphere has been threatening to deliver for weeks. We will be tracking every model run between now and then, and bringing you updates as the picture sharpens. For right now, here is your takeaway for the next 7 days. Today, Sunday, May 31st, stay weather aware across Nebraska, the Dakotas, and the Kansas-Missouri border region through the afternoon and evening. Damaging winds and hail are possible. A tornado cannot be ruled out near any surface boundary in Kansas and Missouri. Monday, June 1st, the Central Plains from northeastern Colorado through Hays, Salina, and Wichita carry the highest severe weather threat of the immediate period, with large hail, damaging winds, and an isolated tornado threat from discrete supercells in the afternoon, transitioning to a damaging wind threat from an overnight mesoscale convective system. Southeast residents from Memphis through Birmingham need to monitor Monday afternoon and evening for flooding and gusty severe storms. Tuesday through Thursday, the threat gradually steps eastward and increases across the northern plains as the next mid-level trough approaches. Wednesday and Thursday are the best days for organised severe weather in the Dakotas and Minnesota corridor. Flooding is the most widespread and persistent hazard of the week, affecting areas from the Gulf Coast to Montana to West Texas. And beyond this week, the setup for a more significant pattern change and a potential organised outbreak in the second weekend of June is building in the models and deserves attention. Thank you for spending this time with Sky Space Lab. If this breakdown helped you understand what is coming and why, please consider giving us a like and subscribing to the channel. Every single one truly makes a difference for a channel this new. We will have our next update video as the Monday severe weather setup comes into sharper focus, and as the Wednesday through Thursday threat firms up in the outlooks. The atmosphere is not done with us yet, not by a long shot. The quiet of May is over, and June is already making its case.